probably reason it someday. People will say it's a finance song.
News broke this week from the third ring of Joel Greenberg's circus. We've spent the last two episodes bringing you up to speed on the Seminole County story, which made headlines this spring when a federal investigation into Greenberg's tax agency reached from Lake Mary, Florida, to the halls of the U.S. Capitol building in D.C.
And just hours after the release of our last episode, the Orlando Sentinel's Jason Garcia and editor Jeff Weiner reported that Keith Ingersoll and James Adamczyk have been indicted on charges related to wire fraud, illegal money transfers, and identity theft.
Through his company KI Consulting, Ingersoll is accused of running a real estate scheme that bilked an investor out of $12 million.
And when the unnamed victim of the scheme attempted to take his money out of the fund, Ingersoll and Adamczyk took steps to prevent the investment from being returned.
According to the 18-page indictment, Ingersoll told the investor that the money would sit in an escrow account overseen by an attorney. However, the state alleges that the attorney named to the account had not only been suspended since 2008, but died soon thereafter.
Upon the suspended attorney's death, Adamczyk told the investor that he was an attorney and that he would oversee the escrow account.
James Adamczyk is not an attorney, the funds were not being put in escrow, and the indictment says that the money was being transferred to the benefit of Ingersoll and his associate Adamczyk.
And if you've been following with us at home, then you may remember that this is not the first time Ingersoll and his company have been associated with shady real estate deals.
In addition to a $48,000 contract with Greenberg's tax agency, for which auditors say there was no evidence of work, Ingersoll and James Adamczyk transferred the deed for an old bank building between each other at the expense of $130,000 to Seminole County taxpayers. In addition to Ingersoll's real estate schemes, we noted last week that the organic fresh coin initial coin offering was incorporated to the same building as Ingersoll's KI Consulting. I wanted to turn over to Bennett Tomlin, who joins us today, actually a returning guest on the show. He's a data scientist and fraud detection expert. He writes about cryptocurrency and criminality in the space at bennettftomlin.com. And you can listen to his show with Caspiancy at Crypto Critic Pod. Bennett, welcome back to the show.
Glad to be here.
Okay, so what are your opinions, Bennett, on the authenticity of the organic fresh coin initial coin offering?
I am convinced that the organic fresh coin ICO was illegitimate. Looking at the blockchain distribution of the tokens and the organic fresh coin website, there are some extraordinarily odd things that you begin to notice. The website says that about 88% of the tokens were going to be distributed to the community broadly and 10% to the team. Looking at the top holders currently of organic fresh coin, we see that just about 88% of the tokens are held in a single wallet, and just about 10% of the tokens are held in another wallet. It seems as though there was not any kind of legitimate organic demand for the organic fresh coin ICO, and instead it was just a single entity trying to capture these use these coins as part of some other sort of scheme.
We've been able to locate a particular crypto wallet that has 86% of the total volume of organic fresh coin within it. That number is conspicuously close to the amount organic fresh coin claimed would be open to the entire public. Except it wasn't dispersed to multiple wallets. It was all dispersed to this one wallet that has a figure relatively close to the total that Organic Fresh Coin executives indicated would be available to the public, which leads us to the conclusion that this was not an authentic initial coin offering.
Yes, exactly. We saw that basically the amount we expected to get distributed to the community got distributed to one entity. The amount we expected to get distributed to the team got distributed to another entity, and neither of those seem to have ever really, in a major fashion, used or distributed these organic fresh coins more. There's a single transfer out from the largest wallet, but beyond that, they mostly just sit in these two places.
So a fake initial coin offering would be precisely the type of action you might take if you were attempting to launder ill-gotten gain.
You start with the pile of illicit cash. Often you use that through a place you can go with no know your customer regulations, like certain over the counter desks in crypto. You gain a variety of crypto, but you still eventually need a way to sell this for cash and integrate the cash back into the banking system. So you need to create an entity that has a legitimate reason to have that much cryptocurrency. So you create a company, foundation, whatever, that's going to hold an initial coin offering. They sell, quote unquote, the token, receive now the crypto that was originally bought with illicit funds, and they now, as an entity, have an excuse to sell it into cash and potentially reintroduce it into the banking system because they conducted a quote unquote legitimate initial coin offering. In the case of organic fresh coin, I think this is again why the connections to Belarusian leaders and significant figures are important, because they may have aided in organic fresh coin having access to banking accounts and stuff they need to fully complete this hypothetical transaction.
It's worth noting that Organic Fresh Coin executives claim that they had a $15 million investment, and that 86% of the coin's volume would be a figure that lands pretty close to the amount Adamczyk and Ingersoll are accused of bilking an investor out of in real estate fraud.
Organic fresh coin claimed to have raised $15 million. Interestingly, and perhaps coincidentally, that aligns pretty close with the $12.9 million that Ingersoll and Adamczyk were indicted for as part of their wire fraud conspiracy involving real estate transactions.
And joining us to help discuss Ingersoll and the rest of his associates in Ring 3 of Greenberg Circus is at gal_suburban on Twitter, whose research in the summer of 2021 helped break the initial reporting by the Orlando Sentinel. Journalist Scott Stedman's excellent piece linking Ingersoll to the organic fresh coin initial coin offering credited Gal's Twitter profile directly in the text of that forensic news story.
Gal, thanks for taking the time to sit down with us. When we talked to Brian Butte, we asked him what it felt like to know something that the rest of the world has not yet learned. You told me that there was a point in this story when you felt like you were on an island. Take me back to this past summer. What piqued your interest in this story?
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me. Well, the story has certainly evolved, but basically, when I talk about being on an island, I guess I'm referring to the media coverage of the Greenberg case. I'm personally in Matt Gaetz' district. Most of the people in Florida's first congressional district basically know what kind of character Matt Gaetz is. So, excuse me, what Matt Gaetz is. So the sex trafficking allegations really weren't a big surprise to most of us here. But I was struck by the lack of public interest in the story because, what was behind the sex, I guess. Matt, in his own words, has said when he talks about what happened with, Epstein, that he says introducing young girls to politicians and people of power isn't necessarily about sex, but it's about power and leverage. And I figured, considering Matt and Joel and others sick of fancy over Roger Stone, who loves to have leverage over people he considers obstacles to him, it lends credibility, I guess, to the idea that that's likely what was at play here rather than, just the sex.
And I think a lot of people will be able to relate to you on that as the entry point for interest in this story. But how did you first come to know about Keith Ingersoll?
So it was ignoring kind of the mainstream conversation around the story, and really looking into, or at least trying to understand the different players, what their involvement was with Greenberg, why they would be associated with the tax collector, and educating myself too on what tax collectors do. I think that's something that's new. At least it was a new discovery to me. So it was each name that would come out, would really look more towards what companies did they have registered, who had they done business with before, any available court records. So just a really open source research investigation into each name specifically instead. And that's how I came to Ingersoll.
Got you. And what did you find out about Ingersoll's relationship with Joel Greenberg and the Seminole County Tax Office through real estate and investments of that kind?
There was a few things that stuck out. Orlando Sentinel, they had reported, well, it was, I think you reported on it. It was basically signed the same day, and Ingersoll would have been the broker on that. And it was really interesting that Ingersoll was hired, or, contracted with the tax office for real estate consulting, which I don't know. I suppose I didn't know that a tax
Hmm.
collector needed one of those. Um, but also, when I started looking into Jason Pirozzolo, is where I found more of Keith Ingersoll and Adamczyk. So they had, I think, more of like socialites almost in Orlando. So it looked like they had gone out and they were part of this Red Carpet Mondays, which is actually still an ongoing thing in Orlando. And so the three of them, actually, I found four of them, Greenberg, Pirozzolo, Ingersoll, and Adamczyk, had been at nightclub openings and cocktail parties and things like that.
So, a conspicuously young crowd of women with this assortment of individuals in Orlando. The real estate connections between Adamczyk and Ingersoll go up to and include, in particular, that Adamczyk had opened an LLC called
Oh, shooters, right?
Shooters. That's right. And had claimed that his initial reason for acquiring this piece of real estate was because he'd planned to open a restaurant on the spot, right? And then Ingersoll, who has, as you say, an inexplicable role in acquiring real estate for the tax collector, um, enters in and pays Adamczyk on the same day more than he had spent on that particular morning acquiring the same property for ostensibly a restaurant operation for shooters. And Adamczyk has connections between not just Ingersoll, but also, as we're going to get to a little bit later, with Organic Fresh Coin that made a LinkedIn post associating Adamczyk as a partner on that project, right? Which Ingersoll was named executive VP of. So we have all of these interesting connections, between these two that have predated this indictment that has come down this week.
He was kind of seemed to be just a partner in a lot of this, but it was Aaron Miller that really caught my personal interest when I was looking into Ingersoll's associations too.
Well, then let's talk about Aaron Miller. Aaron Miller has the benefit of being a person known variously by his first name and his middle name, which helps sort of complicate the
Yes.
paper trail associated with
Very
him.
much so.
And so you can see Christopher Aaron Miller named variously in various public documents, right? You and other researchers in your sphere have put a lot of time into connecting Ingersoll with Christopher Aaron Miller. And this is something that we haven't really broached on this topic. Can you tell us about those two, possibly as far back as Ingersoll's association with Miller and the Belle Isle Auxiliary Police Force.
I think you guys discussed it in one of your other episodes of his fender bender turned driving under the influence, clearly. And when he was talking down to that police officer, he said, "I used to be a police officer." And I thought, what? Okay, whatever, dude. But when I went to look for it, I was like, oh man, he wasn't lying, surprisingly. So when you look at that and then you find the documentation that essentially he was released from his duties at the Belle Isle department for essentially helping Aaron Miller evade a criminal warrant that was out for his arrest. I believe it was out of Las Vegas, actually.
Wow.
And so, part of that was, it was just really interesting to find that discovery and think, well, what the heck does this guy have to do with somebody who has a felony criminal warrant out of Las Vegas?
Yeah.
So.
And just to sort of circle around to a couple of the things we're referencing there. So Ingersoll was arrested for a fender bender that he had while visibly intoxicated. If you look up Real World Police on Twitter or YouTube, you can find about 45 minutes of police body cam and interrogation room video of Keith Ingersoll being arrested and making it very clear to the arresting officers that he is way too big for any of this shit. And it's very, and I think sort of everyone watching it just as an uninvested media consumer can sort of appreciate the dynamic at play here, right? You've got a guy, he says in the video, "I own all of the real estate that you see around you." He's standing next to his Rolls Royce, right? And he's incredibly intoxicated. And I think in any rational observer,
and it's the middle of the day.
Right. Middle of the day. And one of my favorite things also, to sort of look back on it and think about the stress Ingersoll might have been under at this particular moment this video was taken, is that it sounds like he's been yelling a lot very, very recently. His voice is incredibly hoarse and all this sort of stuff. And so I'm just imagining a guy who spent like the last 2 days just screaming over the phone at people,
of course,
trying to sort of cover all of this off, right? And you try not to hang too much around that little glimpse into Keith Ingersoll. But one of the things you do get, as Gal mentioned for us, is that Ingersoll alleges that he was a cop, right? And I want to just sort of intervene here as we're sort of setting that up, is that he was a volunteer police officer, right? Like Ingersoll was not like a full-on cop for Belle Isle. He was on this auxiliary police force. He was a volunteer cop. He was
like a reserve,
he was
reservist, sort of.
Right. And not to put too fine a point on it, but like very sort of like a Dwight Schrute role in the Belle Isle police force. When you go and you dig on it, right, you find that the reason he was thrown off is because, as Gal has given us this association with Christopher Aaron Miller.
They go back far, all the way back. I even found a news article and video of them together looking at some kind of like auction property from 2011. So they certainly have a history in real estate, acquiring properties. It looks, it's not just like, oh, we're going to buy a house together. This is very much like, what are we going to do with this property and investment type of situation. And then when you really look into it, and what I thought was curious when I found, Chris Miller or Aaron Miller, whichever one he goes by that day, was that Ingersoll, because I thought to myself, well, why does Ingersoll know this guy? And I found that he actually has a trust in his name, like a revocable trust that's registered.
Oh, wow.
So I thought that was really curious why these two would have that. But When you look a little bit further, they have multiple entities. They share multiple business entities. Most of them were, open and close pretty quickly. So, give the kind of that feel that maybe they were operational for a very short, specific purpose. A lot of times those are called shell companies.
Hmm.
So that's
Right.
what I started to notice between them.
Uh, can you take us now through the information that Jason Garcia tweeted about this week, which was an instance involving Eric Fogelsong, who had stolen, it seems, about $20,000 from a political action committee. And in being caught doing this, he was scrambling to repay that money back to this political committee. And in doing so, he wrote an email outlining his investors to cover his graft. And he named, in addition to Keith Ingersoll, was Chris Dorworth, who you'll remember from the second ring of our circus in last week's episode.
Now, what's interesting about Fogelsang, actually, it takes me to a conversation interview, essentially, that I had with a political candidate. He was a candidate for sheriff of Orange County, Florida, in Central Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And he dealt with Fogelsang. And when Fogelsang, I think, I'm not sure if the charges were embezzlement or what, I can't remember exactly what they were, but from that political action committee, it was during his race. This person that I spoke with, his name is Joe Lopez. And his story is really interesting and might be something for you guys to take a look at. But basically, all of the same kind of players that we're talking about today also were in coordination with Joel Greenberg, Eric Fogelsang, Keith Ingersoll, Wade Voss, and several others. So, believe the sheriff's race where he was $20,000 and he needed to repay it. So he would have sent that request to the people who were helping in that candidacy, which were who I just named. And one thing that Joe Lopez, the candidate running against that person, said to me was when he was introduced by Jacob Ingalls to Mike Shirley and Keith Ingersoll, that Ingersoll was considered their money man, is what he was introduced to Keith Ingersoll as. So it would make sense that if Eric was struggling to, meet an amount of money that he needed, that he would call on somebody like Keith Ingersoll, who's kind of known in that circle as the money man.
This actually wasn't the only piece of news related to Ingersoll and the third ring of Greenberg Circus.
On Tuesday, Scott Stedman reported that Mikhail Morgulis, honorary consul to the Belarusian consulate in Florida, died Tuesday. Morgulis was the chair of a Russian diaspora group that was put under investigation this summer for its role in gathering support for the Trump campaign. On Thursday, the diaspora group called the Russian Community Council announced that it was suspending activities because of an FBI investigation into potential violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act.
Morgulis was on the advisory board of Organic Fresh Coin, an initial coin offering from 2018, which named Ingersoll and two other members of the Ingersoll family as executives.
Gal, what can you tell us about Ingersoll's connection to Morgulis and Organic Fresh Coin?
Sure. So going through corporate documents between Miller and Ingersoll is where I came across the different cryptocurrency organizations and led me to Organic Fresh Coin, where I was able to kind of find their executive summary and that mission statement, background information, etc. And I noticed that there were 3 Ingersolls on the board of directors. So you had, it looks like Jim Ingersoll, Keith Ingersoll, and then their father, James Ingersoll, which I just thought was really interesting. But also, as you said, Mikhail Morgulis, and then somebody named the president, who seemed pretty actively involved in organic fresh coin from the beginning.
And what about Mikhail Morgulis, who it was announced on his Facebook page and then reported out by Scott Stedman that he met with his demise this week? Can you talk to me about Morgulis and his associations with Sergei Millian or other entities in Eastern Europe?
So what I was able to find, he was really an interesting person to look at, frankly. I mean, there's just so much history there, where I think it was in the early 1980s, you had a big group of, um, Orthodox Christians who, traveled to Eastern Europe and specifically to Russia, um, I believe they were meeting in sort of like a World Congress of Families type of thing. And what I recall, I found some old Christian magazines that he was in, talking about how he prayed with with the KGB, and Gorbachev, and he describes in detail, that moment, the spiritual moment that he had, and um, when he I think when he returned in the early 1980s, he was introduced to the Bush administration and was invited to the prayer breakfast, the National Prayer Breakfast. So that was likely his introduction into American politics. And from there, it seems that he decided that that was kind of a role that he was going to play as a spiritual diplomacy concept that he kind of created through that to spread sort of like I suppose like a religious based diplomatic approach to international relations.
And a lot of that was accomplished through pamphlets and various publications, and in addition to political connections of all kinds. So this is Mikhail Mergulis. He was often, as after he was named the honorary consul for the Belarusian diplomatic program, he was photographed with the actual ambassador to Belarus, and was also, though he denied to Scott Stedman any actual association with Organic Fresh Coin, obviously in the executive summary, but also photographed at Organic Fresh Coin meetings in their uh, public relations and all of these sorts of things. So the association is kind of hard to deny, though he may have while he was still alive. And I wanted to sort of to say less about Mikhail Margulis at this point, because one of the things that we haven't done a great job of doing so far in this series is sort of sketching out how um, people accomplish crimes in this space. Bennett, can you give us a broad sketch of the most common ways people launder money through cryptocurrency investment and exchange?
Sure. So I think the most important thing is first to remember what the goal of money laundering is. You have dirty money outside the banking system that you want to get inside of the banking system so that you can use it to transact. With cryptocurrencies, you generally see this happen in a few steps. And at one of the steps, you'll see why organic fresh coin is so important and why some of the oddities around their ICO were really striking to me. So you're starting with this pile of illicit or illegitimate cash. You use this to purchase cryptocurrencies. The most common way to perform this transaction is to go to an over the counter broker who is willing to basically give you the cryptocurrency in exchange for the cash without following the expected know your customer and anti money laundering processes. Once you have the cryptocurrency, the trick is then to do several interactions to try to obscure who exactly had the cryptocurrency and where did it come from. This can be done by sending it through mixers, moving it through several different exchanges, sending it to like crypto gambling sites, and just things like that that help obscure the original source of the cryptocurrency. Then you need a way to justify you having the group of cryptocurrency at the end and the final conversion back into cash in a quote unquote legitimate manner. So in the case of something So one way to do that would be to run an ICO, or initial coin offering. So in this case, you are creating a brand new token that has never existed before, and you are accepting an existing cryptocurrency like Ether, which is the token for the Ethereum protocol, for it. So you could create a new coin, let's call it OFC, and then sell it in exchange for Ether. You now, as the corporation behind this hypothetical OFC coin, have a legitimate reason to have this amount of cryptocurrency. Then when you sell that cryptocurrency, you are getting cash for a legitimate reason. You've conducted these series of business transactions. And so looking specifically at the example of something like Organic Fresh Coin, there's a few oddities around their ICO that I think lend some credence to this kind of worry. They claim to have raised $15 million, but looking at the blockchain and their known addresses, you do not see the amount of funds moving to that location that you would expect for that to be true.
Yeah.
And so mechanistically, what we'd be looking at here is a group of people having access to a bunch of illegitimate cash, going through an over-the-counter desk to purchase Ethereum, sending that Ethereum to the corporate entity offering this Organic Fresh Coin, and then taking the cryptocurrency received, selling it again, probably through a similar over-the-counter service for cash, though they might have used exchanges at this point because it's semi-legitimate, and then depositing it in the bank system. And so that would be the broad strokes of how that process would look.
One of the remaining questions in the Joel Greenberg story is that it's hard to figure out who had the need for cryptocurrency. Seminole County tax auditor said that they had never held any cryptocurrency. They didn't have any need to hold any cryptocurrency, right? So there isn't an ostensible reason within the tax collector's office to have it. And there's not really anyone in Greenberg's web who you can think of that would have much use for it, except for Keith Ingersoll and Organic Fresh Coin. And so I think that's one of the reasons that we wanted to start to try to get an idea of how people sort of carry this kind of thing out. I wanted you to talk for a moment as well about how an ICO might benefit from an association with a government, right? Because in the space, the people who are serious believers purport to like cryptocurrency because of its freedom, its sovereignty from a third party censorship entity like a state. And so it seems strange then that you would have an ICO attempt to bolster itself by its association with a state. Can you speculate at all about what a theoretical ICO might stand to gain from that kind of association?
So there's a couple different possible explanations that immediately come to mind. The first is to remember that, especially in 2017 and 2018, there was a bit of a division in cryptocurrency between like the more cypherpunk true believers who were interested in this kind of censorship resistant anti-state technology, and perhaps a larger subset who were mostly interested for purely speculative purposes, or had bought into a narrative that the technology was broadly transformative even without challenging the power of the state. Among a collection of ICOs, many of which were outright scams and frauds, there were a variety of them that tried to use connections to various marks of authority to suggest that they were not among the scams and frauds. So the first explanation would be that Organic Fresh Coin was advertising their connection to Belarus to make it seem to the public more broadly that Organic Fresh Coin was a serious company doing serious things with this technology. The other thing is that in money laundering more broadly, often it's best to make the conversion into the final step of cash in a location where you expect there to be inadequate controls. So where you expect when you're making that conversion that the transactions are not going to be overly looked at. And so it could be that Belarus is not being thorough enough with their know your customer and anti-money laundering policies. And because of that, they wanted to go there. The other thing is that especially in 2017 and 2018, it was often difficult for cryptocurrency companies to maintain consistent banking. If the connections to certain officials of the Belarus government are legitimate and they were actually connected in some way to organic fresh coin, having those type of connections may have made it possible to get bank accounts in Belarus that they were able to then deposit the cash in at the end step.
Would a state stand anything to gain from a supply of cryptocurrency?
Well, I think it depends. I mean, North Korea, we've seen like hack exchanges to get access to cryptocurrency because they've been so sanctioned and cut off from the dollar and general financial infrastructure that having it is useful for them in terms of other things. I think there was some announcement that some Russian state fund was investing a certain amount into Bitcoin a few weeks ago. There have been talks, though it's always hard to tell what's legitimate and what's just someone starting a rumor in the crypto Twitter world. But there have been talks that the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund is interested in cryptocurrencies.
Yep. I was wondering when that name would get brought up.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
often I think the entities most interested, like states especially, in gaining cryptocurrencies are going to be the entities with the least access to or the least reason to support the continued dollar hegemony.
I also think it's worth noting here that a lot of times when states and intelligence communities dip a toe into the black market, the reason for this is because there's a need for funds that are not attached to the state and what the state divvies out in its official budget, right? And so a lot of times the criminality we've seen even in the American intelligence community has stemmed from the need to have, or the desire to have, a black budget of some kind.
Yeah, and I think this is so talking about states purchasing cryptocurrencies, I would be remiss if I didn't mention El Salvador, who basically adopted Bitcoin as compulsory tender in their country. And reporting coming out of El Salvador has suggested that I'm just going to call him a dictator because he calls himself a dictator. The dictator, Nayib Bukele, has conferred with some of his close associates and discussed creating a new currency for El Salvador that would be effectively backed by the Bitcoin they hold in trust. And so the other reason is that dollarized countries may see it as an opportunity for them to justify, again, creating their own currency. So for a country like El Salvador, picking up a whole bunch of cryptocurrency may again allow them to start printing their own currency and start to de-dollarize.
Organic fresh coin presented itself as Morgulis' connection to Lukashenko, and how they have a picture of Lukashenko and Morgulis together, and essentially underneath it saying, it's backed by, the country of Belarus. So I think it's really interesting to know what's happening in the current events with Belarus, and why they might need, like you said, some sort of black eye, dark money funding to put migrants at the border.
Yes.
Whatever.
Yes. We all need to make sure after this episode is released that none of us fly over the state of Belarus in an airplane. So
this is an independently produced podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at COINTELPROPod and support more of our work on our Patreon page. The link is in the show notes and in our Twitter bio. We'll see you next week on COINTELPRO.